Our first speaker, as I already said, is Ugur Mersinlioglu. He's from API 3, and he's going to talk about Oracle Extractable Value through orderful auction. So give a huge round of applause for Ugur.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you for the turn up. I know it's early, but I hope that you will be able to follow me. So basically, my name is Ugur. I was already introduced by Hannah. Thank you for that. And I am a product owner at API 3. And what we do is oracles. So before I get started, I know we're not a lot, but does everyone here know how an oracle works? Raise your hands if you... All right, perfect. So the next 1 or 2 slides might be boring then. So why oracles? We know that blockchains only have access to information that is already on them. So you can't simply access the internet to, for instance, get prices. You need somebody to bring that into you for you to consume it. The typical example for that are price feeds. Everybody knows them from, for instance, Chainlink. Price feeds are typically maintained according to certain conditions. In the Chainlink example, it's push oracles, meaning when the off-chain price and the on-chain price, for instance, differ by 1%, we update the on-chain price to reflect the real world. Why we do that only under certain conditions is that we cannot update with every single block. We can't simply pay so much gas to keep the real world on-chain basically the entire time. So what we do instead is create these conditions, for instance, 1% deviation, or every hour, or once a day, to make it more affordable to reflect the real world on-chain. But we still got to ask ourselves, who at the end of the day pays for this? Like, who pays to bring price information, for instance, on-chain? And I know we're not a lot, but I'm just going to ask into the round, who do you think do dApps pay for this? Like, raise of hands if you think any dApp pays for Oracle services. 2, 3? OK. So in most cases, I'm just going to bring up a slide from Adam Cochran, I think is the name. Basically, what we dealt with in the last 5 years is that price feeds or any Oracle services are basically free for dApps and mostly subsidized by, for instance, the Oracle project. In the case of Chainlink, it was like that basically you as a link holder were passively subsidizing all of the price feeds that people were using on Ethereum. dApps actually pay nothing and have almost never paid for Oracle services. And in some cases, chains actually pay, but only like in niche cases. For instance, the Ethereum Foundation is not paying for price feeds on Ethereum. They are mostly subsidized, but some niche chains might cover the cost. But essentially, we created this environment where we have a product that costs something, but because it's so heavily subsidized, dApps are used to not paying. Either the chain picks up the tab or the Oracle project picks up the tab. And that's actually a quite interesting trend we see in the last couple of months, where Oracle projects are slowly starting to ask for money. And dApps are not really used to paying. Chains are only used to paying the bare minimum. So what happens is, and we realize this a lot in our business development efforts in the last couple of months, is people approach us because others actually dared to ask for money. And that is a quite interesting trend where you see that you don't really make money providing price feeds. If you start charging, they will just go to somebody else who will reintroduce this cycle of subsidization, because we've established these grounds of oracles are not something you pay for. They are just there for you to use. And that is a very tricky thing, or like a very tricky situation, because at the end of the day, you're running these things either in a minus through subsidization or at cost, where you basically just cover your grounds, and your only hope of making or like generating value for your project is hoping that adoption leads to positive price action, which, if we look at Oracle valuations and what they actually enable, just isn't the case. Like, the real value of what is enabled, I think Oracle secure over 40 billion in the DeFi space, but no Oracle project is even close to coming to that valuation. So if you as an Oracle project are only providing quote-unquote simple price feeds, you're eventually going to fail. Somebody is always going to make that cheaper or for free. So we as Oracle projects need to bring more to the table to be allowed to subsidize for the most critical service in the blockchain space, essentially. And this brings me to today's topic, which is Oracle Extractable Value. Oracle Extractable Value is essentially a subset of MEV. What is MEV? All of you know this, probably. It's a hidden fee that is imposed on blockchain users by more strategic third parties that extract value from their transaction. A lot of words, but you know what this means. You buy, for instance, 100 ETH of Pepe on Uniswap. Somebody sees your transaction in the mempool. They buy before you, they sell after you, sandwiching you in between and extracting value from you. Effectively, then the question becomes, what does this have to do with oracles? Like I mentioned, dApps use oracles to determine the spot prices of their supported assets. For instance, a lending market needs to know what their collateral is worth, which then in effect means that any update to such a price, or even the lack of such an update, will create opportunities to extract value. This can be in the form of front-running, for instance, buying before an Oracle update and then selling straight after. It can be arbitrage, where the on-chain price lags behind, for instance, a centralized exchange, and you can arb the difference. Or it can be in the form of liquidation. So similar to MEV, OEV just describes the value extraction by more strategic third parties that is related to oracles. If we look at the MEV field out there, what is typically being done to tackle this field are order flow auctions. So when you as a user have an intent to change the state of the blockchain, that is effectively an order, and we call a collection of these order flow, and if you auction this order flow off, it's called an order flow auction. And order flow auctions can be performed in various different stacks of the, in various different levels of the blockchain stack. You can, for instance, do it directly at the dApp level, which is something like CowSwap. I'm not sure if you are aware of that. You can do it on the builder level, where you route your transactions through something like MEV share or MEV blocker. These people effectively use your orders, extract any MEV that is related to it, and return like 90% of that to you. Or you can do Oracle, like order flow auctions on the validator level. So then we basically ask ourselves, why don't we take these valuable Oracle transactions we have and just route them through one of these layers to create order flow, for instance, to the searchers. And the main issue of why we don't do this, there's quite a few reasons, but the main one is these auctions introduce most of the times, delays. And this would mean that if you want to update a price feed because something important happened and you want to reflect that on-chain, now you kind of need to wait for the auction to be done, see who pays you the most for the update, and now your price feed is getting delayed by 10, 15, 20 seconds, which is just not something acceptable in most cases if we have a, let's say, 10% drop in like 15 seconds. It's just not acceptable to do that. So what we needed is then to think about how can we auction off these Oracle order flow, and similarly to how I told you that there are different layers of where you can actually introduce order flow auctions, we thought we just bring the order flow auctions to the Oracle layer. And how we do that is that we have a base data feed that is maintained according to deviation and heartbeat, similar to something like Chainlink. So every time there's a 1% change, we update the on-chain price feed. But in addition to that, Oracle order flow, like another update, can be requested by somebody else by just asking the oracles for an update now in this moment, because there is something on-chain that you want to achieve. And that costs you something that is associated essentially to an auction. A simple example for this would, for instance, be, and I have one later as well, where the price of ETH is at 1,000. We know the next update will be at 990 or at 1,010 if it's 1% deviation. But the off-chain price actually is 999, and there is a liquidation possible on Aave at 999. So now there is value attached to getting exactly that number from the oracles, even though the oracles themselves won't necessarily update when that value is available. So effectively, the existing design, the base feed, is maintaining all of the security guarantees that we have in the data feed, while we also allow value to be generated that can be auctioned off. What makes this possible is something we call the OEV relay. So effectively, it's a relay that collects data from all the oracles in a data feed. Then these answers are auctioned off. The winner fetches the answer, and in that fetching process, in that meta transaction they fetch, they basically get exclusive rights to update the data feed, and everything is attached to it, like basically all the answers of all the Oracle nodes, which are cryptographically signed, plus how much they bid to get that answer. And now they can update the data feed, and in the same transaction, they need to pay in order to be able to update it. And we imply a very similar model here to what MEV share of flashbots or MEV blocker implies, where we basically take a 90, or like return 90% of this generated value to the dApp in the form of the bid, and take a 10% cut. One issue that you still have is that when you allow anyone to update the base feed, it might be that you update it because you see a liquidation on Aave, but at the same time, that update now allows you to liquidate somebody on Compound, for instance, which is a very big problem, because now, if somebody paid you for it, who do you associate that money to? Do you give it to Aave? Do you try to figure out how much each protocol should have gotten? And it becomes very complicated. So we can't allow anyone to update the base feed, which is why we introduced effectively data feed proxies. So instead of the dApps just reading the base feed, each dApp reads a proxy instead. This proxy reads the base feed, but can be updated on top of this. So basically, a searcher, instead of updating the base feed, updates a specific proxy of a dApp. This way, if you see a liquidation on Aave, you bid to update the Aave ETH-USD feed. And this has no implications on Compound, which means we can associate now the value that's being generated directly to Aave, and Aave gets paid for it. The end of this is basically a structure like this. Like I mentioned, I'm going to start on the right side with the dApp. You have a dApp. This dApp reads their dApp-specific proxy, for instance, Aave ETH-USD. And this dApp-specific proxy is mainly reading the base data feed. This data feed is being maintained, let's say, by 30 Oracle nodes at 1% deviation. So every time, this just reads there. But now a searcher sees, hey, apart from these 1% updates that the feed already does, there is value right now that I need to extract. So what they can do is effectively make bids to these Oracle nodes and get signed answers from all of them. And then, instead of updating this base feed, update the dApp-specific proxy, pay the dApp for being allowed to do this, and update it and essentially extract all the value that is associated with it. For instance, liquidations, obviously, if somebody liquidates someone on Aave, there is a certain value attached for it. If you liquidate 500,000 position, there's like 10K to be made, which means that there's $10,000 of value that can be auctioned off in this process. And in the best case scenario, people are so competitive with each other that most of that 10K actually flows back to Aave. And this is a bit complex, so I'll just try and give you a more precise example of what this allows. This was last June or July during that whole Three Arrows Capital disaster. They basically had a pretty big position on Aave, and their health factor was very low. Basically, I think the ETH-USD price feed of Chainlink was at 1,020, and the next update would have been at something like 1,010. and the Three Arrows Capital liquidation price was at 1,014. So you know Chainlink would have only updated basically under 1,010, which, as you can see on the graph on the right, never actually happened. The price dipped. It would have been liquidated if we were on a centralized exchange, and then it just went up again. So basically, Three Arrows Capital, in that sense, the position was saved simply by not the Oracle not updating due to the deviation configuration that is being made. So if we instead, if they instead used the OEV share model that I described, we would have still had the base feed at 1,020, but when the off-chain price would have hit 1,014, searchers would have been able to pay for that update, and it was like a 1,000 ETH position. Like, we're talking a lot of money here, and they would have been able to compete for that update that has a lot of value attached to it, update the proxy, and thus net all of the rewards that are attached to it, obviously after the cost that they paid for the update. In this instance, Three Arrows Capital would have been liquidated right at that position. Aave would have made more fees because there's also a liquidation penalty attached to it. And in addition to that, searchers actually would have paid Aave in order to be allowed to liquidate this position, since this auction brings the money back to them, most of it. So why OEV share? The gist of why you should use OEV share is very similar to why people use something like MEV blocker or Flashbot's MEV share. Order flow that you create has potential value attached to it, and there are parties that are willing to pay for this. Like, if you route through Flashbots, if you route through MEV blocker, people actually pay for your transactions. And dApps that use oracles are pretty much in the same position. Like, you using an oracle means that any oracle update potentially creates value, and currently that is just being ignored. Typically, similar to how your transaction has value to it and can be auctioned off, you using an oracle as a dApp actually create value where you should get a, so to speak, quick kickback. So we thought it is only natural to bring this auction process onto the Oracle layer and allow dApps to actually take control over their transactions. And I think that is pretty much it. I'm sorry for the slides. I was a bit under time pressure, but I hope everyone got the gist of it. That's pretty much it. If you have questions, shoot. Otherwise, and I can't see if there's like something in the chat room that is not on here. Yes? Sorry, I didn't hear. I mean, it kind of depends if there's value attached to it. Randomness is a bit trickier because you don't really, like, I wouldn't say it works for randomness, but I don't also want to just restrict it to, for instance, price feeds. It could, for instance, be that there's anything else in the world where there's value attached to it. So basically, anytime the Oracle update actually creates some type of value where it might be beneficial to update earlier than just the preset conditions. Because like what people typically do, or like in this push Chainlink scenario, or in this typical push Oracle scenario, is somebody just decides what is the most economical way to configure this, which might be 1%, because after that the costs get insanely high. And then they just update at that 1%, not really caring about if there might be something in between, or what their updates might do. So we kind of need to introduce a way to allow other people to also update if there's value to it. So basically, oracles need to, in addition to maintaining the security guarantees, allow or acknowledge that there might be additional cases to update. Like, any update is always good, and if people are willing to pay for it, that's even better. Vulnerabilities in the sense?
Yeah, for this model, what vulnerabilities can happen?
So
What do you think?
basically, in our way, somebody, for instance, needs to run this relay, which is very centralized. So basically, where you ask and pay for, that is something run by a centralized entity, which we try to mitigate by having the base feed that is decentralized. Like, for instance, this OEV these additional updates can be gone, for instance, if we are removed from the equation, but the base feed will always be there. So there are essentially ways how should I say this? It's basically currently a centralized service slapped on top of something that is decentralized and maintains the security guarantees, which is the only reason why it makes it acceptable. Like, essentially, the value add comes from something more efficient, similar to L2s currently. Like, L2s create all of these value, but all of them are centralized. And it is kind of okay and accepted because they share the security guarantees of the base layer. And in the same case here, OEV on top of these base layer of Oracle feeds is accepted to be centralized because if everything goes wrong, the base feed doesn't die. It still continues to operate.
Sorry. It looks like the new way to earn on flashpots.
Yeah, it is a little, that's why I say like OEV is a subset of MEV. Like, it is MEV, but just related to everything Oracles. So this is essentially flashbots for Oracles.
Do you have this product already, or it's just a project?
We currently are in alpha testing with like 5 dApps. We have developed it in the last like 6 months, and we're going to release it sometime this year, or like maybe even a quarter.
Thank you for the presentation. The fact that you can update different proxy oracles, will it allow for arbitrage in terms of, like, if you have a position hedged with another position and 2 people update the 2 different proxies with different prices, you might not be hedged? Is that a possibility?
Obviously, it depends on your on what type of product you have. For instance, I wouldn't potentially recommend a push oracle for something like derivatives platforms. Like, derivatives platforms currently are thriving on the pull model. So what you're describing, where you mostly have the arbitrage, if you look at something like lending protocols, it won't make that much of a difference. And what we're talking about here is also mostly very small differences. For instance, most price feeds are already operating on very low deviations. So it's when we're talking like difference in what compound reads and what Aave reads, and you take, like, let's say the base feed is at 1000, Aave might be at 1001 and compound might be at 1002, so to speak. And that arbitrage opportunity, again, creates a potential auction where you can essentially, now somebody else is inclined to take a loan there, update this, and pay it. You know what I mean? Like, it continuously creates opportunities to be auctioned off. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Great job.